She wore a pink sweater and carried a stethoscope in her purse. She said she was a nurse, but once the door shut, she became something else entirely. Between 1998 and 2006, elderly women across Mexico City were dying, in their homes, in broad daylight. No forced entry, no clear motive, just the same twisted pattern, a kind face, a kind lie, and then strangulation. Dozens dead. The press gave her a name, La Mataviejitas, the little old lady killer. But behind that nickname wasn't a shadowy man. It was a woman, a former lucha libre wrestler, Juana Barraza, a daughter, a mother, a killer. And what made her snap wasn't evil. It was rage, the kind you bury for decades until it cracks your bones from the inside. To understand how a woman, once seen as a protector of the weak, became a nightmare to Mexico's grandmothers, you have to go back to a time long before the bodies, before the panic, before the media called her a monster. Juana Barraza wasn't born evil, she was born abandoned. November 27th, 1957, Hidalgo, Mexico, a small village surrounded by dust, silence, and the slow ache of poverty. Her mother, an alcoholic, her father, a ghost. Before she turned 13, Juana had already tasted betrayal most never will. Her mother, Maria, traded her. Yes, traded her own daughter for beer and a man. The man was 40, Juana was 13. And that's where her story begins, not in a courtroom, not in a police file, but in that moment, when a child realized she was alone. The abuse was brutal, repeated, every single night, and no one came for her. Juana eventually escaped, or so she thought. But what survives childhood trauma doesn't always grow back straight. Sometimes it twists, quietly. She got older, tried to live a normal life, married twice, had 4 children, but pain, real pain, has a long memory. One child died in a street mugging, another suffered from disabilities. Juana couldn't catch a break, couldn't keep a job, couldn't keep up with rent. So she turned to what she knew best: strength. The wrestling ring. By night, she was La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence, a masked luchadora. She wasn't famous, but she was fierce, and inside that ring she was finally in control. But outside, life was slipping away. Welfare jobs weren't enough, and being strong didn't pay the bills, especially when your past keeps pulling you backward, whispering in your ear, "They never protected you. Why should you protect them?" That whisper grew louder. Until, one day, it stopped being a whisper and started becoming a plan. It began with a knock, a polite smile, a promise to help. The year? 1998, Mexico City, a sprawling metropolis where thousands go unseen every single day. That morning, Juana wasn't wearing her wrestling mask. She wore something else, a disguise far more dangerous, a white coat, a clipboard, the illusion of authority. She told the old woman she was from a government welfare program, said she was there to register her for food assistance. The woman believed her, because why wouldn't she? Elderly, alone, forgotten by her own children, she just wanted someone to care. Juana sat, listened, smiled. And when the woman turned her back, Juana grabbed a stethoscope from her bag, wrapped it around her neck, tightened. The woman fell, quickly, without a scream. And Juana, silent, focused, began searching for money, jewelry, anything she could pawn for a bottle of alcohol. She left the apartment locked, the windows closed, and vanished into the chaos of Mexico City. The police ruled it a robbery, a break-in, maybe even a burglary gone wrong. But it wasn't. It was a test, and it worked. No one suspected a woman. No one looked for patterns. But there was a pattern, one so subtle it almost didn't exist, until it did. The victims were all women, all over 60, all lived alone, and all had been strangled with something different, every time. A phone cord, a scarf, a belt, even the handles of a handbag. The press didn't connect the dots, not yet. But Juana did. With every kill, she got better, more confident, more daring. She started posing as a nurse, a social worker, even a city employee. She carried fake ID cards, knew exactly what to say, how to look the part, and always, she picked women who reminded her of her mother, the woman who sold her, the woman who started it all. This wasn't just about theft anymore. It was about punishment. And Juana had just begun her sentence. By the early 2000s, something had shifted in Mexico City. It wasn't just fear. It was silence. In hallways, apartment buildings, nursing homes, where old women once sat in windows. Now curtains were drawn, because another one had died. And then, another. The deaths were no longer brushed off as coincidences. Someone was doing this, deliberately, systematically, and that someone was still out there. Panic spread like wildfire, because this wasn't just murder. This was a pattern. The police called her La Mataviejitas, the little old lady killer. The tabloids loved it. The headlines screamed it. Serial killer stalks elderly. Monster masquerading as a nurse. No one is safe. But behind the chaos, there was a problem. A deeply uncomfortable one. The police didn't know who to look for. They had no clear profile, no fingerprints, no consistent weapon, just bodies. And Mexico didn't do serial killers. Not publicly, not comfortably. This was supposed to be an American phenomenon, a Hollywood horror. But it was here, in their city, in their neighborhoods. And every week, the body count grew. At first, the police blamed men. A former convict. A gang member. A drifter. They even arrested a woman once. She'd simply been delivering flyers near the scene of a murder, spent days in custody before they admitted their mistake. And all the while, Juana kept walking, unnoticed, untouched, because no one was looking for a middle-aged woman, let alone one who looked like someone's aunt, or nurse, or friendly neighbor. She watched it unfold on the news. Sometimes, while polishing the very jewelry she had stolen, or sipping from a bottle she'd bought using a victim's coins. And she smiled. Because the more they searched, the more invisible she became. And as for the elderly women of Mexico City, they were told to lock their doors, avoid strangers, stay safe. But when your killer wears a white coat and offers government help, how do you tell danger from kindness? You don't, not until it's too late. For years, Juana Barraza moved like a ghost. But not every encounter ended in silence. Not every victim stayed down. In 2003, one woman, Aurora de la Luz Gonzalez, answered a knock on her door. The woman outside wore a nurse's uniform. Said she was with social services, offered help, food support, a health checkup. Aurora, in her 60s, smiled. Let her in. But something was wrong. The woman kept scanning the apartment. Her eyes flicked to the jewelry box, the photos, the hallway. Aurora's instincts kicked in. She excused herself, walked to the kitchen, and dialed her son. But before she could speak, Juana lunged. The phone flew from her hand. But the scream, that part landed. Neighbors heard it. The front door burst open. Juana ran, left empty-handed. But the image burned into Aurora's memory, and days later, into a sketch artist's page. For the first time, there was a face. And it wasn't a man. It wasn't a thug. It was a woman. Round face, hair tied back, wide shoulders. But the police hesitated. They brushed it aside. One survivor, not enough. So Juana kept going. She attacked another. This time, Tamara Gonzalez, 78 years old. Same approach. Same white coat, same story. But Tamara was tough. She fought, scratched Juana's face, tore at her clothes. Juana fled, again, just seconds ahead of capture. But this time she left something behind, a fingerprint, a partial, but a match. Only the police didn't run it, not for months, because the database was flawed, backlogged, mismanaged, bureaucracy had failed, and Juana used the time. to kill again. The survivor report started stacking up. Women who saw the killer but lived, each with the same description: a strong woman, middle-aged, pretending to help. By 2005, the walls were closing in. Sketches began appearing on lampposts, bulletins aired warnings, and the public? They started watching. Suspicion grew. A woman in a nurse's uniform was no longer welcome. And Juana? She was getting reckless. She changed tactics. Sometimes no uniform. Sometimes she'd force her way in. Sometimes she'd use charm. But the fury, the hatred, that never changed, and neither did the victims. Old, trusting, alone. Until finally, one mistake, one door, one hallway, one fingerprint, too many. And a neighbour who didn't just hear something, they saw something. January 25th, 2006. It was supposed to be like all the others. The same routine, the same lie, the same ending. Juana Barraza had her eyes set on another elderly woman, Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro, age 82. She followed her home, smiled, held the usual clipboard, wore the nurse's disguise. Ana welcomed her in, but this time, there was a twist. A neighbour, someone alert, noticed the woman entering. Something about her movements, her posture, the way she scanned the hallway before stepping inside. It didn't feel right. So they waited, watched, and then they heard it. The thud, the sound of something falling, the eerie silence that followed. And when Juana walked out, she wasn't alone. The neighbour stepped forward, asked where she was coming from. Juana answered calmly, but the voice wavered. Hands trembled. She tried to walk away, but others had gathered. One called the police. Juana ran. She didn't get far, just a few blocks before the officers caught up. They pinned her down, and when they opened her bag, a stethoscope, rubber gloves, a fake credential. But most chilling of all, a piece of paper with names of women, ages, addresses. She was keeping track, like trophies. The officers didn't understand what they were looking at. Not yet. But they took her in. Mugshots, interrogation, the usual questions. And then came the fingerprint. Run through the system. It matched a partial from one of the early attacks. A near miss. They had her. But Mexico City's police weren't ready. They'd spent years insisting the killer was a man. Years blaming a mythical male nurse, a group of criminals, anyone but a woman. So when the truth arrived, it embarrassed them, exposed them. And the public? They were livid. For years the warnings didn't mention her gender. For years, elderly women had no clue that the real danger looked like one of them. Short, round-faced, cordial. A woman who'd once cared for a child, now the face of 17 brutal murders. And maybe more. Some say 30, others 40. Juana sat quietly in the interrogation room. The lights buzzed overhead. Officers leaned in. Why? They asked. She didn't cry, didn't beg. She said just 7 words in. They were old. I needed vodka. The trial of Juana Barraza didn't begin in a courtroom. It began in the streets, where elderly women, once silenced by fear, marched with photos of their mothers, their sisters, their neighbours, faces that once meant warmth, now symbols of loss. Mexico wanted answers. But Juana didn't offer any. Her expression was blank, her voice steady. And as she stood before the judge, dressed not as a killer, but as someone's grandmother, there was no apology, no guilt, just this unsettling calm. Prosecutors charged her with 30 murders, 30, but the evidence only held for 17. And so, in March of 2008, Juana Barraza was convicted of 16 counts of murder, 12 robberies, 1 count of attempted murder, and a life of deception. The court sentenced her to 759 years in prison, Mexico's harshest sentence for a woman in modern history. And yet, she smiled. When they asked her why she'd chosen elderly women, why she'd chosen that method, why the nurse disguise, her response chilled the room. My mother gave me away to a man for 3 beers. I hated women like her. That was it. Not vodka, not poverty, not mental illness, but hate, deep-rooted, bone-deep hatred. She saw her mother in every wrinkled face, every polite gesture, every cup of tea offered with kindness. And so she killed them, not for gain, but for retribution. In prison, Juana became popular. Her wrestling past gave her celebrity. Other inmates treated her with a twisted respect. Some called her La Mataviejitas to her face, the little old lady killer, and she laughed. Laughed, a woman who'd held the hands of her victims as they begged for life, laughing in the mess hall. It raised a question far darker than her crimes. Was she ever sorry? Or was she always like this? Authorities would later admit Juana could have been stopped years earlier. If only someone had believed that a woman was capable of such horror. If only they'd looked beyond the assumptions, the gender bias, the flawed profiles. But they didn't. And for that, 17 women, maybe more, paid with their lives. Today, Juana Barraza sits in a maximum security facility in Mexico. She is 66. She is still alive, and she is still unrepentant. Behind her cell bars, she crochets, watches telenovelas, smiles when she hears her name on the news, a name that will never be forgotten, not because of who she was, but because of what she did. They called her La Mataviejitas, the little old lady killer, but long before the headlines, long before the trial, she was just Juana, a little girl from Ñaran who wanted her mother to love her. She never got that. And somewhere along the way, that empty space turned into something else. Something monstrous. In the years that followed her arrest, Mexico was forced to confront more than just one woman's crimes. It was forced to confront its blind spots, its assumptions, its failure to protect those most vulnerable. Because for 8 years, elderly women were strangled in their own homes, and no one believed the killer could be female. They arrested men, blamed gangs, chased ghosts, but never looked at her. Juana Barraza exposed more than the fragility of life. She exposed the fragility of justice, a system that missed the patterns, a society that failed its mothers and their daughters. Today, when we say her name, it's not because she was cunning. It's not because she got away with it for so long. It's because behind every one of her crimes was a broken system, and behind that system were broken people. Her victims, many of them lived quiet, humble lives, forgotten by the city they helped build, until one knock on the door was the last sound they ever heard, and the woman who delivered it wasn't a monster in the night. She was daylight, she was polite, she was someone's daughter, and yet she never saw them as someone's mother. In the end, Juana didn't just kill her victims, she erased them, from families, from safety, from memory, but we remember them now, not just as names in a case file, but as a reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles and says, "Would you like some help with your groceries?" This was the story of Juana Barraza, and you've been watching Beyond Her Rage.